Hi, my name is Bella Caridad Ferreira and I'm the CEO of Fundscape, a research house specialising in the end-to-end research of the UK fund industry. My presentation today is about funds of funds in the UK. Like some of the football teams in the World Cup, funds of funds have never quite lived up to expectation. And by that I mean that commentators are always predicting that the asset class is on the cusp of taking off, but it never quite does. However, that might be about to change. Funds of funds play an important role in the UK industry, and since RDR, they're expected to grow rapidly in size alongside other package solutions. In the last 10 years alone, third-party funds of funds have grown eightfold and now stand at £56 billion, which is roughly 8% of total industry assets. And this time, we believe they're on track to grow even faster, but we'll visit our projections later. As they're managed by professionals, these products should, in theory, be diversified in terms of asset class, geography, and underlying fund manager. So we shone the spotlight on funds of funds holdings to test that theory. We took the top 10 holdings of the top 100 funds of funds in the UK, which is roughly 85%, and we worked out the holdings across the entire asset class. The first thing we discovered is that the top 5 funds of funds managers account for roughly half of all funds of funds assets. But more surprisingly, in 2013, they also accounted for 95% of all net flows. That's pretty big. That means that if you're not on the radar of the top 5, you don't have a cat-in-house chance of gathering assets in the UK, or at least gathering assets that stick. So it pays to know who's hot or not in the funds of funds world. Those top 5 players by flows are moving targets. The top players 5 years ago have given way to others. Why? Well, fund managers wax and wane, but there are other reasons. Distribution influence, vertical integration, essentially eating other people's lunches. In short, RDR has been a game changer. Fund managers can no longer pay advisors to sell their funds, so instead they give preferential terms to organisations and outfits that can influence the buying decision. Those organisations include platforms with curated shortlists or proprietary products such as Hargreaves Lansdown, or Standard Life and AXA Elevate, where the advisor gets a dual fuel discount, i.e. you buy the platform and you get the funds cheaper. And then there are the ones that go the whole hog. And here, Old Mutual is a prime example. It has the fund manager, the Wealth Select range, the platform, and the intrinsic network of advisors to buy said funds through said platform. So once again, it pays to understand who has distribution influence. When we walk down most high streets in the UK, we see the same brands with the same products because they're the only ones who can afford the huge rents. And that's what's happening in the UK fund industry. It's really only the big generalist players who can afford to play the game. Model portfolios and funds of funds are an extension of that trend. Our analysis found that 36% of UK funds of funds assets are invested in just 5 underlying fund managers. So much for diversification, right? Well, actually, regulation is one of the key problems that funds of funds face. The bigger the fund, the more challenging it is to find funds that it can invest in without breaking sector rules or UCITS rules. Hence why there is a bias towards bigger funds. But it is just a bias. There are boutique fund houses that are punching well above their weight because consistent performance always wins out. The top 3 underlying funds in the UK were Artemis Income, Majedie UK Equity and Finley Park American. None of these is a large generalist, but Majedie and Finley Park are particularly small boutiques. So performance counts every time, and funds of funds managers will always find a way to invest. We have a few more funds of funds myths to debunk. Myth number 1. Multi-asset funds of funds are growing rapidly. Wrong. 67% of underlying assets are invested in equity products, and a further 28% is invested in bond products, so really quite mainstream. Myth number 2. Funds of funds are geographically diverse, using strategic asset allocation to optimize returns for their end clients. Wrong again. More than 50% of underlying holdings have a UK focus. I asked some fund managers why that was, and each time they brought up the thorny issue of foreign exchange risk as the main barrier to investing overseas. One manager told me about his particular quest for a fund and how he could only find 2 of them that were GBP hedged. So if you're a purveyor of frontier funds or unusual countries or sectors and you'd like to play in the UK, make sure you've got the GBP issue covered. Myth number 3. The use of passive instruments will grow rapidly post RDR. Wrong. Sadly, that hasn't happened yet, but it's likely to start gathering momentum in the coming years. But at the moment, just 7% of underlying funds are in passive instruments. However, the funds of funds managers we interviewed all agreed that cost pressures would result in the greater use of ETFs and index trackers for core index exposure. They're prepared to pay for alpha, so we're essentially looking at a barbell with the cheap index trackers at one end and alpha generators at the other end. If you're sitting somewhere in the middle, you need to review your pricing. Smart beta and derivatives such as futures will also be increasingly used to keep costs down. So for fund managers who can head off these concerns, the UK fund of funds industry is likely to grow faster than expected. I've touched upon the impact of RDR and the growth of restricted offerings and vertical integration. Well, these cover a large chunk of Middle England. Of the total platform assets at the end of March 2014 of 304 billion, we estimate that roughly half is open to some kind of influence or packaging. So that's quite significant, and funds of funds will play a progressively bigger part of that influence. As a result, we expect third-party funds of funds assets to at worst double in 5 years to approximately 100 billion, and our optimistic outlook suggests assets could treble to around 150 to 155 billion. These are attractive numbers for fund managers who might be looking to do business in the UK funds of funds arena. So how do you stand out from the crowd? Well, I've given you 5 messages that I'm going to summarise once again. Message 1, choose your target carefully. Make sure you know who's making hay in the UK. Message 2, distribution influence. Don't underestimate the impact of influence on fund flows. Message 3, performance is paramount. Make sure your funds do what they say on the tin. And message 4, hedge your bets. If your fund is unusual, make it easier for European funds of fund managers to buy it. And finally, message 5, alpha or beta. Beta is incredibly cheap now, and funds of funds managers will only pay for consistent alpha. So how are you priced? Do you need to review your pricing? So that's the end of my short film. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening and watching. For more information on this report, please visit our website. Thank you. Hi, my name is Bella Caridad Ferrer.